Hello, I'm Kate Mansey.
And I'm Roya Nikkhah. This is The Royals with Roya and Kate from The Times and Sunday Times. Now, a question for you. Why do you listen to this podcast?
If it's for the same reasons that we make it, it's probably because you, like us, think that the royal family is a fascinating institution.
It links history, personalities, family dramas, pomp, ceremony, and sometimes profound moments that bring a country together and define an era.
And at the moment, it all feeds into a wider national debate about what it means to be British today and how that's defined. As the country grapples with its place in an ever-changing world, where does the royal family fit in? What's the best way for them to fulfil their role in the world?
Today, we're searching for an answer to those questions through the actions of a king, a prince, and a duchess.
So we turn first to a royal who appears to have set out a clear direction for her work and purpose around the world. That's Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, married to Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, who's the king's youngest brother.
Well, the Duchess of Edinburgh has just been on a top secret and high-risk visit to the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa, to a region that's long been considered one of the worst places in the world to be a woman or a girl in conflict.
Violence, sexual violence in particular, is commonplace and is often used as a weapon of war. While she was there, Sophie told the world that each one of the victims' stories needed to be told. I wish we didn't have to hear them, she said, but we do.
So this week, we're joined by our chief foreign correspondent at the Sunday Times, Christina Lamb, who was with Sophie. Christina's renowned for investigating what war does to women and reporting from conflict zones around the world. Thank you so much for joining us, Christina.
Pleasure. Yes, it's so nice to have you. Thanks for coming.
Straight from the Congo.
Yes.
So, Christina, tell us, you were with the Duchess of Edinburgh. Where were you and what were you doing?
So, as you know, the Duchess of Edinburgh is very passionate about raising awareness on the use of rape as a weapon of war, which sadly I see as a correspondent mostly covering conflict that is happening more and more. I can't think of a single conflict where it's not happening. And so she had gone to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which, as you said, is the worst place to be a woman, pretty much, apart from perhaps Afghanistan. And she went there in 2022 to see what was going on and promised that she would go back. And so this was a trip to go back and see what's happening. But the situation has worsened considerably since 2022 because this militia, M23, which is backed by Rwanda, earlier this year seized a huge amount of land in eastern Congo, which is the sort of most mineral-rich part of the country. And that is the area which has seen the highest level of rape. So what was already a really astronomical number has escalated more. And so she was going to highlight that. I have to say, I was really surprised that the trip didn't get cancelled, because although there was a peace deal signed in theory earlier this year, the fighting is still going on and had actually kind of increased the week before we were due to go. So I rather thought this is actually, she's going into what's called a red zone, a place that the Foreign Office say, no way ever go, basically. And I did not really think that she would be still going into it, but she did. Kudos to her.
Did you pick up a certain determination from her to go ahead with that trip? I asked because I remember talking to someone who discussed one of her trips with her to Ukraine when she went to Ukraine last year, and she wrote a wonderful piece for us. And the government, I was told, were very against her going because they considered it too dangerous, and she was insistent that she still go. And I just wondered whether you picked up a determination from her to go through with this trip.
I travelled with her once before to raise this issue, and it was the first time she went into a conflict zone, which was South Sudan in 2020, which also we went into the north, which was really quite a dangerous area. And not only was there fighting going on, but it was the first COVID had started. It was February 2020. So I really thought that trip would get cancelled, but she went ahead with it.
It's
so
interesting,
I think she is very determined.
I was going to say, because we hear about from the palace that these trips often happen at the request of government, but there's so much personal will. I mean, she wouldn't be going if she didn't want to. She doesn't have to be there at all, I think you said in your piece. What is her reaction when she's on the ground? She comes across as very determined, quite courageous. She to go to these places as a member of the royal family. She's not a war correspondent like you. She presumably has had risk awareness training. But what's she like on the ground in these places?
Yeah, I have to say I'm not a royalist, I would say, but I'm incredibly impressed by her. I think she is absolutely committed to this issue, determined to raise it. And it wasn't an easy trip. We went first to Beni, which is not far. It's in the same province, North Kivu, which M23 has taken. So
this is a lot of fighting over the resources that are used to make laptops and devices.
Exactly.
And
there's a thing called tantalum, a metal, which is used in our phones, smartphones, I think in hip and knee replacements, and also in our laptops. So we're all using these things every day. And one of the world's biggest deposits is in that area. So that's why these different groups want to get hold of it. And it's super complicated, so I'm not going to try and explain the whole conflict here, but you basically have Rwandan troops, Ugandan troops, Congolese troops, Burundi troops, M23 militia. You have an Islamic terrorist group called ADF, which had, in the last couple of months before we went, had carried out some really horrific attacks in the region, like massacring people in a church. And so, it was really...
a lot of the stuff we don't get to hear about often.
Yeah, and so she had... obviously she's not just flying in there without a lot of preparation.
But what's the kind of security around her?
Well, I was amazed. There were actually 14 close protection people. I've never seen so many.
That's a lot more than normal.
And also they had like teams in different countries monitoring things. And then, of course, there were people on the ground. In Beni, we were with some of the UN peacekeeping forces. So the trip started in Beni. We went first with the UN peacekeepers to see, and it's a Brazilian general who's commanding there at the moment, General Ulysses. So he wanted to show the sort of jungle training that they're doing for Congolese army. So because the area is very, it's the Congo Basin, it's one of the biggest rainforests on Earth. And she actually quite gamely took part in some of the training exercises. I wouldn't have liked to have had to do that.
What was she doing?
They gave her like a compass to have to then find her way through certain areas, and then they showed her the different kind of improvised explosive devices that use like tripwires, and also putting explosives inside like milk powder cans and things, and then sent her to sort of try and spot some of these. And we'd literally only just arrived. It was quite early, and I personally was needing a coffee, and so I would not have wanted to do that. But she, gamely did all that. And then after that, we started on a series of meetings of going to talk to women peace builders, but also survivors of rape.
One of the key things that you and the Duchess were there to sort of see was the work of a very leading surgeon in the field of horrendous surgery that he does on very young children and sometimes babies who've been assaulted and abused. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I know that was sort of a very arresting intro to your piece on Sunday.
Sure. So from Beni, we were there for a day and a half. Then we flew to Kinshasa, and that's where we went to the Mansey clinic, which is run by really probably my greatest hero, a man called Denis Mukwege, who set up a hospital, Mansey Hospital in Eastern Congo, which is now also under M23 militia control. So we couldn't meet him there. We met him at his clinic in Kinshasa, which is much smaller. And his hospital in Bukavu has treated more rape victims, I'm absolutely sure, than anywhere on earth, more than 80,000 women and girls. And so he is amazing. She had gone to see him in 2022. And one of the things he said to her when she asked, what he needed and things, he said, people will come and see me all the time, say what wonderful work you're doing, and then go away and do nothing. And so that really kind of got to her. So she became very determined that she was go back, but also that she'd try and do something. And she refers to Dr. Mukwege as a magician. It's just an amazing man. He's 70. He's had threats on his life all the time. He's from Eastern Congo, and he's a gynecologist, and he set up this hospital, which was originally meant to be a maternity hospital because there's such high rates of maternal death. But these women started coming very quickly who'd had the most terrible rapes. And
really young as well. There was the girl in your piece, and she was about just a few years old.
So one of the things he said, so he's been doing this work for, I mean, there's been violence in Congo. This is actually the 5th war since 96. So millions of people, it's totally undercovered, but at least 5 million people have been killed in that time. You don't read about it, right? And hundreds of thousands of women.
Unfortunately, we do read about some of it because from your courageous reporting.
It's so important that
and how many children is he seeing every
So what
month,
he says is that, how the thing has changed is that now, at the beginning, it was mostly adult women. And now he says 30% of the people that come are children. And these are not 16-year-olds. He had just that week a 20-month-old baby girl who'd been raped. So I was in the operating theatre with the Duchess as we watched him repair a 5-year-old girl who'd been raped.
Unimaginable.
It's
horrendous.
it is beyond any imagination. You can't understand why anybody would do such a thing. But it's a horrific story, but the sort of good side, if you like, was that because the Duchess was so moved by what he said before, she's also patron of something called the Scar Free Foundation, which deals with disfigurement and is based in Wales. And so she then had an idea, speaking to them, that maybe they could actually help with some of the surgery for these women and girls. So she has started a collaboration. So while we were there were 4 surgeons from Swansea University and Swansea Hospital who were there.
Who had flown out there to help.
Yeah, and so this is now, and they are also taking some of the doctors from Dr. Mukwege's hospital to train them.
Back in Swansea.
Including...
And that's a direct result of the Duchess's intervention,
absolutely,
essentially.
bringing them to... And she said that's one of the things she can do. I mean, apart from the fact she can sort of give a platform to this issue, she does have sort of convening power, if you like. She can bring people together. She can see how different people can work. So it was good to see, a lot of what I report is unfortunately, very bleak, but it was good to see a positive outcome.
With the trip like that, when she and you come away from it, does she go, do you then talk about what the next steps might be, what the next thing she might help with? Does she, what was her takeaway from that, other than seeing that work in action? You talk about, the Swansea and DRC collaboration. What's her next kind of goal in terms of taking it forwards? Because it's incredible. It gets huge spotlight when she's there, but then sometimes it just, the issue, if you're not reporting on it, who's looking at it for the next few months?
No, but I think for her, it's an ongoing thing. She's now traveled to Bosnia, Chad, South Sudan, Ukraine, DRC twice, all to raise this issue, and she's presumably looking at where next. I know as somebody that has tried to report this for many years, it's really, really difficult to get people to engage with this. It's not an easy story. It's
hard to read,
and I am aware of that. But just because things are uncomfortable doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage with them.
As you said at the beginning, we shouldn't have to read about this, but I'm afraid we do. We need to know about it. What's the reason behind, sort of veering off the subject of the Duchess slightly, but what's the reason behind rape as a weapon of war in this instance? And it is you talk about all the different militia groups and the different interests in the area. Is it a standardized kind of weapon across all the different groups, or how do they stop this? I mean,
well, I think in DRC, all parties, the UN says all parties are involved, whether it's I did find it slightly odd that at times we had the Congolese military protecting us, and they're actually also heavily implicated in this. But, the fact is, I'm sorry to say, but rape as a weapon of war, it is a very effective weapon. If you want to humiliate your enemy, to drive them out, going in and raping the women and children. And so it's used for different reasons. In some places it's ethnic, in some places it's religious motivation or political. Here in Congo it's much more because of the minerals, that people want to get hold of those areas because they're so lucrative. So it's coltan, it's gold, they have all sorts of minerals that are really, really wanted by the world. And so these militias, to get hold of those areas, if they go in and rape all the women and girls, it will drive the community out. And this is a huge problem. And, what I think both the Duchess and I really felt hard listening. These stories are really hard to listen to, right, of what's happened. But people were so matter of fact about it. Some of the women were saying, yeah, if we go to collect firewood or water, we get raped. As if this was just a normal thing. Yeah. And that's like, no, it's not normal.
Part of everyday life for them.
That is. And one of the things I think important of what the Duchess does is she's not just shining a light and talking to survivors, and these stories are very hard to hear, and I wonder how she deals with that really afterwards. But she also makes a big effort to go and talk to women peace builders on the ground. And one of the things I think is really important in trying to deal with this is having more women involved in peace negotiations, having more women peacekeepers, having more women in as judges.
Positions of authority.
That would make a difference, because I'm sorry to say that in a lot of cases, men do not take this as seriously as women do. I have had male judges, for example, in Iraq, who were trying some of the ISIS fighters who'd taken Yazidi girls as sex slaves. Literally, when I asked the Chief Justice who was trying these people, and they're all being tried on terrorist charges, why are you not? I asked if any of the people you're trying, did they also take Yazidi girls as sex slaves? And he said, yes, of course. So I said, why are you not trying them for that? And he literally laughed. He said, why would I try them for that? They also killed people.
Yeah, well, they're still alive. What's the problem, sort of thing. But that's interesting with regards to the Duchess and how she can convene. I mean, as a woman in that country, how seriously is she taken? Because in your report you said that she went to the kind of the big palace there to meet the president and was kept waiting for 2 hours.
I think that's normal though.
Right. Okay.
It's definitely my memory of the DRC with the last Archbishop of Canterbury. We were kept waiting everywhere we went.
Right. And it just
in vast palaces.
And in these lavish palaces. How seriously is she taken out there? How does the royal brand, if you like, how does it?
Yeah, I did wonder, if some of these people where we were going actually had a clue who she was. And there was one quite funny occasion right at the beginning in Beni when we sat it, because people hadn't been told she was coming because it was secret. They were just told a VVIP was coming.
And your piece couldn't come out even until after she'd left the country for security reasons.
The first meeting that she had, which was a sort of security briefing arriving in Beni with like the governor, the commander of troops, the mayor of Beni. When the mayor of Beni spoke, he obviously, so Sophie had arrived in kind of what I'd call jungle chic, right? She was wearing jungle pants and a sort of khaki shirt. She looked great, but we were going into the jungle. The ambassador had come in a sort of bright pink jacket and sort of heels and trousers, less appropriate, I would say. But she perhaps looked like she was the more important person.
Right.
So the mayor of Beni started addressing her. And so somebody had to say, well, actually, this is the VVIP. But I think, her passion and the fact that she knows what she's talking about it impresses me, because I sit with her in some of these meetings. She encourages me to ask questions as well, which is good. But she's asking the kind of questions I would ask as a journalist. She's
pretty switched on.
Yeah, she knows this stuff.
As a self-proclaimed non-monarchist, which you said you are, and which I think adds a really interesting dimension to your reporting with Sophie, because you've done a few trips with her now. When you see her in action on the ground, whether that's in South Sudan, you obviously you read her dispatch for us for Ukraine, you've just been with her in the DRC. I'm interested, how does that inform your view of the royal family and the public work that they're doing?
So look, I've been banging on about this issue for maybe 12 years. It's very hard to get people to engage. So having somebody like her who can get into these places, who is listened to, is really important. She doesn't have to do this. It's not a comfortable trip. It's difficult to listen to these stories. It's a difficult issue to get people to engage with. You and I know I would never have got a story about the DRC on the front page, maybe even in the paper at all, if it hadn't been with her. And so, I think that's wonderful. I think I'm really impressed, to be honest, at what she's doing.
And
I hope she continues.
Why does she do it? Where does that interest in taking up this cause in the way that she has come from?
I asked her before when we went to South Sudan, and it was interesting because she said, she has to do a lot of, I suppose, what I might call like fluffy engagement, sort of opening hospitals and
bread and butter
things. And she said that she felt like she was there to sort of spread, I think she used the expression like a bit of fairy dust, but that she wasn't really adding anything, and that even it was kind of taking up people's time so much because they would always have to make a lot of preparations to have a royal visit and when they had important work to do. So when she got introduced to this issue, it was suddenly something that she really could engage with and felt she could actually do something, because it's something that people weren't listening to. And she, as I said, she has this convening power. I've been to round tables and things that she's held that are not public, that are for her to be informed about what's going on. So I know for a fact this isn't just something she's doing to try and, I don't know, look like Princess Diana with the landmines in Angola.
Well, you do, the comparison does come to mind.
Yeah. I did, when I went to South Sudan with her, I asked her about that, because I did think, this going into a war zone as a female royal.
Well, it's an absolutely fascinating read, Christina, and I was really pleased to see it did incredibly well at the weekend in terms of engagement with our readers and readers beyond. So although it is, as you say, a really difficult subject to get people to engage with, your reporting and the Duchess's involvement, people were really interested in that story. So thank you for reporting on that. It was fantastic.
Thank you, and thanks for talking about it today.
The timing of this trip, I think, has been really interesting, and particularly given what we've been hearing from you about the reality on the ground and how horrendous that is and how conflict is still raging across the DRC. It is a conflict, or conflicts, that President Trump claims to have, one of the many, many wars he claims to have solved. He described a deal signed in the Oval Office in June as a glorious triumph. Is it?
I don't think anybody on the ground would say that, because it was a deal that was signed between Rwanda, which is backing this militia, and the DRC, but it wasn't actually a deal with the militia itself. And in fact, it was, I think most people would say it was more of a statement of intent than a peace deal. There was no explanation how anything would be implemented. And, we are recording this on a momentous day, in theory, because Trump last night declared peace in the Middle East. And if that is truly the case, if we're going to see an end to what Israel has been doing in Gaza, then, that is a huge thing. And it was very nice to wake up to some good news. Yeah. But, as the same thing with that, how is it actually going to work? It's all very well sort of declaring peace, but, in practice, it's very difficult often to implement these things. And some of these 7 things that he says he has brought peace to, I'm not sure that people would even recognize that some of these were wars. They're actually conflicts that just kind of have break out every year or so and then die down again. And I think that Qatar, which is playing an incredible role in mediating, has been, and the same with Rwanda, Congo, they're the ones that have actually been negotiating it. But, he sort of takes credit. But he does, I don't want to play down, he has enormous power as the President of the United States. If he's saying to Netanyahu in Israel, you must do this and we're going to, stop arming you. And he has the power to really bring them to the table in a way that nobody else on earth has. So I really hope that this deal is actually going to be a lasting deal that will bring peace, because I, for one, am fed up of seeing so many mostly women and children being killed day after day. As we were talking about with Congo, with the women and children, it is the most vulnerable and the innocent that are the victims. And in the most cases, it's very sad and hard to report on sometimes.
Well, on a momentous day for international news, it's great to have you here, and we're going to talk more in a moment.
Now, as I'm sure we all know, trying to do the right thing isn't always straightforward. Agenda setting is one thing, ensuring structural change is quite another, as the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, has discovered once again.
He was president and is now on the governing board of directors of African Parks, a wildlife protection charity that manages more than 20 protected areas across 13 African countries. But this week, the government in Chad announced it is terminating its 15-year partnership with the charity.
In an unusually blunt statement, the Republic of Chad's Environment Ministry accused African Parks of arrogance, financial misconduct, lack of cooperation, and failing to prevent a rise in poaching in 2 of its key reserves. African Parks says it's now in talks to better understand the government's position. We haven't heard Harry's reaction to this news yet, but in his memoir Spare, he was said to use his approach to conservation, very differently to that of William's, and wanted to get involved in a way that would make a difference. How have you seen that play out? I mean, what's your view of the government of Chad saying, essentially ejecting this charity from the country?
Yeah, it is very unusual. And I think, there is a sensitivity of feeling that there's this sort of almost colonial thing of people from outside telling what to do and how you should organise things. And that, going back to Duchess, I think she's really careful to be seen as listening to the people on the ground, what they want, and championing them, not going in there and saying, this is what I think you should do.
Yeah.
I think with Harry and African Parks, African Parks is an organisation that works across a lot of countries in Africa. I've been to Malawi with African Parks and seen an amazing project it did with the now King and the Prince of Wales and Harry, who was involved in helping the rangers on the ground. Our military were deployed with them to help them in counter-poaching, and it worked. But the problem, I think, for Harry, one of the problems he has is that since leaving the royal family as a working member of the royal family, there are less eyes on, in terms of Foreign Office eyes and royal aides eyes and courtiers eyes on the projects he's working on. And with something like African Parks, which, as you've said, from country to country is different and can have this sort of feeling and whiff of colonialism.
That's interesting. So you think that him being extracted from the palace, he's more vulnerable to criticism, but also perhaps doesn't have that kind of the weight of that intra-governmental support.
Exactly. The safety checking of the projects he's working on and what they're doing. And I think you can't expect, no one can really expect Harry to be across all the detail of what African Parks is doing in every single different of the 13 countries he's working in Africa. And that's where I think he's now increasingly vulnerable. And this is, as we know, it's not the first time the Times has reported on African Parks and the sort of issues it's been having. But I think the difference between Sophie going to all these different countries is that when she goes, yes, a lot of it is driven by her in terms of desire, cause, things she wants to focus on. But she has a private office team. She has Foreign Office with, working on it all the time to sort of help and advise. And I think without that, Harry's much more at risk of things going wrong.
And it also talks to that kind of the thing we were saying at the top of the show about what the role of the royal family is around the world nowadays. You know, that the criticism of neo-colonialism. You know, we've seen Kate and William have criticism when they've been to Jamaica and other parts of the world, and the parts of the Caribbean, for example. And it does make you wonder how the royal family can operate to change, you know, situation like you've seen with the Duchess of Edinburgh for the better, while not, you know, while not treading on toes, while accepting those, you know, those sensitivities. Is it possible? I mean, I suppose Sophie shows us how it can be possible, but perhaps it's within that organisation of the monarchy.
Roya said, I mean, this trip is all very much informed by the Foreign Office, the embassy people on the ground, working with organisations. She has somebody from the Foreign Office who advises her on this issue. So she's not out there on her own thinking, oh, I'm going to go in here and do this.
No. And thinking about this theme of royal impact, let's turn to the King and now Prince William, who are sharing one mission: to champion the environment and climate change.
As we know, the King's been talking about the environment for more than 50 years, from organic farming at Highgrove, his home in Gloucestershire, to urban design at Poundbury in Dorset, from Dumfries House in Scotland to the forests of Guyana. His message has been the same throughout. We have to find a balance with nature. And he doesn't mince his words. At COP 4 years ago, he tried to galvanise the world's leaders, saying, we have to put ourselves on a warlike footing. Then, in 2023, a warning. We are carrying out a vast, frightening experiment of changing every ecological condition all at once.
Each time, politicians and pundits applauded the King's speech. But applause isn't policy. This week, yet again, the King appeared ready to deliver the same message, this time alongside Prince William at the countdown to COP30 summit in London. Now, this is just weeks before world leaders gather in Brazil. Are we witnessing the start of a deliberate handover from the King to William? Some people are asking. One for you, Roya.
I'm not sure he would want to see it as a handover, would he? I think he'd be like, I'm still very much involved in
Charles's hand is very much gripping the baton.
It's not handing
we've seen
it
this week, haven't we, with the confirmation that he's doing this harmony film with Amazon. It's all about the King's philosophy for the environment around the world and all the work that he's done, cementing his legacy as a green campaigner, essentially.
And the strength of that joint mission, which I think it is a joint mission, very much joint mission, is a very rare joint engagement by the King and William.
Yes.
At the Natural History Museum, all focused on COP in Brazil in a few weeks' time. We know that William's going to be at the Earthshot Prize, and we expect him to go to COP30 in Belém. I think it's what was striking about the images of them at the Natural History Museum is, of course, the last time we saw them there, Harry was there for a conservation event. Harry was not there. Times change. But I think, again, we are looking at, the King has attended COPs in the past. William has attended COPs. That's almost it's interesting. It's not safer territory because the environment, we've just had the Trump state visit here. The environment is something that the King is passionate about, and William, it's something that Donald Trump is extremely sceptical about. But it's a sphere where the King and the heir can be as political as they possibly can be to a receptive audience.
Yeah, the King, of course, has a lot of credibility on this issue because he was ahead of his time. I was actually based in Brazil in the early 90s when he came out on a trip with Princess Diana, but he raised the whole issue of what was happening in the Amazon. And
ahead of his time, before anyone else.
Ahead of his time. One of the things I fear is, my role normally is to cover all these conflicts that are going on. We know that there are more conflicts, sadly, going on than at any time since the Second World War. So there's all this focus on Ukraine, on the Middle East, on various things that are happening. And it feels like we've rather taken our eye off the ball on the environment, that's not getting the attention that it should have. And frankly, none of these things will matter if we have no planet at the end of the day. So what Charles is talking about is really important.
He's sort of campaigning on the world stage, but then behind the scenes, strengthening that relationship with Donald Trump, which again, we're talking about what's happening in Africa with Sophie, and the fact that US aid has been taken away by the Trump administration, which is having a huge knock-on effect to a lot of communities in Africa. So that relationship, while they're standing on the world stage saying what they're saying about COP, behind the scenes kind of strengthening that relationship, perhaps trying to have some sort of influence on, you know, Donald Trump and other world leaders is interesting as well, isn't it? That kind of what we see.
I mean,
and
I'm
what we
going
don't
to
see.
end up now sounding like a real royalist, saying how.
Well, I think you started saying you weren't a royalist, and now we're not.
If you leave the podcast as a royalist, the Duchess will consider our work done.
Yeah, so we get our medals and tea, Roya, at the palace.
We did see, you know, the use of the royal family so much in action with Trump's visit, because that clearly has made an enormous difference in relations between the UK and the United States, being able to offer that visit, the banquet, the coming here with all the pomp and ceremony, and furthering British interests with a very important trading partner and the most powerful country on earth. You know, that clearly made a difference.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? The work of the royal family, it's the kind of two sides of the same coin. Princess of Wales sitting next to Donald Trump, looking, you know, $1 million at the state banquet in St. George's Hall, and Sophie standing with you in the most appalling circumstances, watching surgery on a baby, essentially, who's a victim of war. I mean, all of that is what they should be doing together, arguably. I mean,
do you think, Christina, we mentioned a couple of the very impassioned speeches the King has made at COPs over the last few years. Kate and I were both in Monaco in the summer with William at an Oceans conference, giving a very impassioned speech about what the world needs to do, you know, with Macron and Lula there, in terms of saving the planet's oceans. For all their impassioned speeches, do you think the world listens to them when they speak above, you know, alongside presidents and other heads of state, or do they just, you know, are their voices slightly lost?
You know, I think that some people do listen, that they do have the ability to reach people who might not normally engage with some of these issues. And to me, that is a very important role.
Well, our thanks to Christina Lamb for joining us today on the podcast. Just got one more question for you, Christina. I've always wondered, what do you make of the royal reporting brief? It's quite different from your
not
gig,
signing up as a royal reporter anytime soon.
I mean, we have hostile environments, but not quite the same as yours.
Yeah, I don't want to tread on your toes. No, I mean, I like to have my own freedom to report. So it is slightly constraining when you're on those kind of trips and you're kind of whisked from place to place and you don't have the freedom. But this was a bit different because we did have time to talk to people at times. We also did get whisked from place to place as well.
And get under the skin of the issue, as I think the Duchess said herself.
Yeah.
Well, Christina's book, Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, What War Does to Women, has recently been updated and is definitely worth a read.
This week, we saw what the royals can do when they get serious about serious issues. The King and the Prince of Wales together set out their stall very clearly around tackling climate change and the loss of natural environments ahead of the COP30 summit in Brazil in a few weeks' time.
And Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has been on a high-risk but hugely important mission to see for herself the appalling sexual violence rife in eastern Congo and how doctors, the UN and others are working to help those attacked. Many of them, as we've just heard from Christina, just children, little girls.
As Sophie said herself, it's not what I feel that matters, it's how we encourage the world to sit up and take notice. And if I can play a small part in that, then that's a privilege and a duty.
And maybe that's the point. Royal involvement can't solve these problems on its own, but perhaps when done with purpose, persistence, and an eye for detail, a difference can be made. Thanks for listening.
Bye, Kate.
Bye, Roya. And bye, Christina. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for the book plug.
Thank you.